At that dinner table, I realized some wounds never truly heal. The clinking of silverware, the soft laughter of relatives, the faint smell of roasted chicken. It all felt deceptively normal, until my mother's voice sliced through the air like a knife. "You shouldn't have been born," she said. Calmly, casually, as though she was commenting on the weather. The entire table froze. Forks hovered midair, glasses trembled in shaking hands, and for a moment, I thought I had misheard her. But the look in her eyes, cold, sharp, deliberate, told me I hadn't. I felt the oxygen drain from my chest. My heart slammed against my ribs, and every fiber of my being screamed to either scream back or flee the room. But I just sat there, silent, staring at the woman who had given me life and yet wished I didn't exist. Around me, my family tried to recover. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. My sister lowered her gaze, pretending to rearrange her napkin. My aunt muttered something about the potatoes. No one confronted her. No one defended me. And in that moment, I understood something painful. I had always been the outcast in this family. But tonight, my mother had finally said it out loud. Her words weren't new. I had felt them in the way she looked at me since I was a child. In the way she praised my siblings but dismissed my achievements. In the way she made me feel like an intruder in my own home. But hearing those words aloud, it was different. It was final. My throat burned, but I forced myself to swallow the lump forming there. If I let myself cry, she would win. If I let myself break, the whole table would nod silently and confirm what she wanted them to believe, that I was weak, unnecessary, disposable. So I did something unexpected. Something even I didn't see coming. I reached for my glass of water. My hand was steady now, no longer trembling. I lifted at it slowly, the way you might when making a toast. Everyone turned to look at me, confused. Even my mother tilted her head, curious, a cruel little smirk forming on her lips. And then, with my voice stronger than I thought possible, I said, "Well, it's funny you say that, because today the very person who shouldn't have been born just got promoted, $90,000 more a year, to life, Mom." I clinked my glass against hers before she could react and took a long sip. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not the awkward, shuffling silence of embarrassment, not the heavy silence of suppressed arguments. This was a silence of pure shock. I could feel the shift in the room. My relatives' eyes darted between me and my mother. Some of them looked impressed. Others looked horrified. My father's face turned pale, and my sister's lips parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. And my mother, her smirk disappeared. Her jaw tightened, her cheeks flushed, and her hand trembled ever so slightly as she set down her fork. For once, she didn't have a response. For once, her weaponized words had backfired. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just placed my glass back down, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and stared at her. Inside, though, something flickered to life, a spark I hadn't felt in years. Because in that one moment I realized she could never truly erase me. She could try to belittle me, shame me, erase my existence with cruel words, but she could never erase what I had built for myself. And for the first time, I wasn't ashamed of being her unwanted child. I was proud. That was the beginning of everything. My name is Emily, and I'm 31 years old. I grew up in a small suburban town where everyone knew each other's business, and family reputations carried more weight than individual happiness. My father works at long hours as an accountant, quiet and detached, while my mother stayed home, carefully curating the image of a perfect family. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Inside those walls, though, life felt very different. I was the middle child wedged between my older sister Claire and my younger brother Ryan. From the very beginning, I sensed I was different. Not in the way children often feel, but in a way that was constantly reinforced by the people around me, especially my mother. Claire was her pride and joy. Beautiful, graceful, top of her class, and eventually married to a doctor. Ryan was her golden boy, athletic, charming, the kind of son who could do no wrong even when he very clearly did. And then there was me, quiet, bookish, stubborn. I wasn't rebellious for the sake of it. I just didn't fit the mold she wanted. And for that, she never forgave me. It started small. "Why can't you smile more like Claire?" she'd say when we took family photos. Or, "Ryan doesn't struggle with math like you do, Emily. Maybe you just aren't cut out for school." At first, I brushed it off. But the older I got, the sharper her words became, like tiny needles pricking into my skin. My father never intervened. He'd clear his throat, shift in his chair, or walk out of the room entirely when Mom lashed out. I used to beg him silently with my eyes to stand up for me. But he never did. Maybe he thought silence was easier. Maybe he thought I could handle it. But his inaction cut almost as deep as her words. Growing up, I poured myself into books and schoolwork, partly to escape, partly to prove her wrong. I wanted her approval so badly. Every A on a test, every extracurricular award, every scholarship application, I thought, this will be it. This will make her proud. But every time she brushed it aside. When I got into university on a full scholarship, I remember walking into the kitchen, letter in hand, grinning from ear to ear. My mom barely looked up from chopping vegetables. "That's nice," she said flatly. "But don't expect us to pay for anything if you mess it up." Meanwhile, Claire's engagement party got the kind of attention usually reserved for royalty. Ryan's football games had the whole family cheering in the stands. And me? I learned how to clap for others while sitting alone in the background. By the time I graduated and landed my first job, I stopped seeking her approval. I told myself I didn't need it anymore, but if I'm being honest, a part of me still craved it. A part of me wanted her to say, "I was wrong about you." So when she looked me in the eyes at that dinner table and said, "You shouldn't have been born," it wasn't just cruel. It was confirmation of everything I had always feared she felt. It was the raw, unfiltered truth that she had disguised for years under backhanded comments and comparisons. But here's the twist. What she didn't realize was that by then, I had already begun carving out a life far away from her shadow. I had worked tirelessly, climbed the ladder in my career, and built something she couldn't ignore, even if she wanted to. That dinner wasn't just another family gathering. It was the moment years of quiet resilience came face to face with decades of cruelty. And though it hurt, it also lit a fire inside me, a fire I didn't know I was about to use. Climbing the ladder to that promotion wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I started at the very bottom, an entry-level assistant in a corporate office where no one knew my name and no one cared if I stayed or left. I was answering phones, scheduling meetings, and running errands for people who barely acknowledged me when they took the coffee from my hands. But I didn't let it stop me. I learned everything I could, stayed late when others went home, and volunteered for projects no one else wanted. I told myself, if I can't be valued at home, I'll build value somewhere else. Every time I MOT'd, her words echoed in my head. Not smart enough, not graceful enough, not good enough. I channeled that into work. Still, success didn't come overnight. There were nights I cried in the office bathroom doubting myself. Times I made mistakes and thought, maybe Mom was right, maybe I don't belong here. But then I'd take a deep breath, wipe my face, and push forward. Slowly, people started noticing. My boss began giving me more responsibility. Clients trusted me with important accounts. Colleagues came to me for advice. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was essential. And then, after years of grinding, sacrificing weekends, and proving myself, I was offered the promotion. Senior Project Manager, $90,000 more a year, along with the authority to lead a team and make decisions that mattered. When my boss told me, I felt a rush of pride I can't even describe. It wasn't just about money or title. It was validation. Proof that all those years of being dismissed at home didn't define me. But here's the cruel irony. Even as I celebrated this milestone, my family managed to find ways to chip away at it. When I called my dad to share the news, his response was a flat, "That's good, Emily, but don't overwork yourself. Your health is more important." It wasn't that he didn't care, but his voice carried no pride, no excitement, just neutrality. Claire's reaction was worse. "Wow, 90,000 more? That's cute," she said over the phone, her tone dripping with condescension. "Tom made twice that last quarter with his medical practice." She laughed like it was a joke, but I could hear the edge in her voice. She wasn't happy for me. She was threatened. "And Ryan?" He shrugged when I told him at a family gathering. "Money isn't everything," he said, leaning back in his chair, a beer in hand. "You work too much, Em. You should try relaxing instead of chasing titles." As if his string of failed jobs and my years of discipline were somehow equivalent. But nothing compass, read to Mom's reaction. When I finally shared the news, she looked at me like I had told her I'd bought the wrong brand of milk. Her exact words were, "Well, good for you, but money can't buy happiness. I just hope you're not forgetting what really matters. Family." Family. The word stung, because she used it like a weapon. Family, in her mind, had always meant loyalty to her rules, obedience to her standards, and silence when she cut me down. So yes, by the time we all sat at that dinner table and she told me I shouldn't have been born, I had already learned not to expect applause from her. But I hadn't expected her to strip me bare with such cruelty either. And that was why, when I lifted my glass and revealed my promotion, I wasn't just announcing success. I was fighting back, silently, elegantly, against decades of being silenced. What she didn't know yet, though, was that this was only the beginning. That promotion wasn't just a title. It was my freedom. It was my revenge. After I raised my glass and made that toast, the atmosphere around the dinner table shifted in ways I couldn't fully explain. It was like a storm cloud had settled above us, heavy and electric, ready to strike. For a moment, no one said a word. My mother's fork scraped against her plate, the sound sharp and jarring in the silence. Claire cleared her throat delicately, trying to smooth things over. "So, 90,000. That's impressive," she said, her smile so forced it almost looked painful. But Mom didn't let her finish. "Money doesn't define success," she snapped, her voice colder than the iced tea in her glass. "A good daughter values her family, not a paycheck." The words landed like bullets, but I didn't flinch. I leaned back in my chair, fingers wrapped around the stem of my glass, and let her venom slide off me. For once, I wasn't going to shrink under her glare. Ryan chimed in then, ever the peacekeeper when it suited him. "Come on, Mom, let's not make a big deal out of this. Em's doing well, that's good, right?" His words were casual, but I caught the sideways glance he threw me. Half pity, half warning. He didn't want me to push back. He never did. But I had already reached my breaking point. "You know what, Mom?" I said, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded. "You've spent my whole life making sure I knew I was never enough. But tonight I'm not asking for your approval. I don't need it. I'm celebrating myself whether you like it or not." Her eyes narrowed, her lips pursed so tightly they nearly disappeared. "Don't talk to me that way," she hissed, her hand gripping her napkin so hard her knuckles whitened. "I am your mother. You owe me respect." Respect. That word again. In her mind, respect had always meant silence. It meant swallowing insults, accepting comparisons, pretending not to notice the favoritism. But I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't the girl who cried in her room after being told she wasn't pretty enough, smart enough, or lovable enough. "No, Mom," I said, my voice rising just enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Respect is earned, and you lost mine a long time ago." Gasps echoed around the table. My aunt muttered, "Oh, dear Lord." Claire shook her head, muttering under her breath, "Drama queen." My father stared down at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. The same old pattern. But this time, I didn't care. I was done playing their game. For the rest of the dinner, the air was tense. Every clink of a fork against porcelain exaggerated. Every sip of wine louder than it should have been. Conversations became forced and fragmented. My mother barely spoke another word, but I could feel her resentment radiating across the table like heat from a fire. Inside, though, something extraordinary was happening. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Not entirely, Not permanently, but in that moment I was untethered from her grip. She could glare, she could seethe, she could whisper about me to relatives later, but she couldn't erase what I had said. She couldn't erase what I had achieved. I had stood my ground, and though part of me trembled at the thought of what would come next, because there's always a next with my mother, another part of me savored the victory. What I didn't know then was that this dinner would ignite a chain of events I never could have predicted. Her bitterness wouldn't stop at words. She was about to take things even further, and I was about to learn just how much damage resentment can do when it festers for years. The days after that dinner felt strangely quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that hums beneath the surface, like the silence before a storm breaks. I went back to my apartment, back to work, back to the normal routines of my life, but in the back of my mind, I knew Mom wasn't finished with me. And I was right. It started with little things. She stopped answering my calls. Family group texts were suddenly filled with photos of Claire's kids and Ryan's weekend trips, but nothing I sent ever got a response. My aunt left me a voicemail once, awkwardly saying, "Your mother's just upset. Maybe you should apologize. Smooth things over." Apologize? For what? For existing? For daring to celebrate something I'd worked my whole life for? No, I wasn't going to bend this time. But Mom wasn't just giving me the silent treatment. She knew exactly how to twist the knife. One evening, Claire called me out of the blue, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mom said you're bragging again. She told everyone at church you think you're better than us now because of your promotion. Honestly, Em, maybe tone it down. You don't want people to think you're arrogant." Arrogant. That word stung because it wasn't me. All I had done was defend myself, refuse to shrink. But Mom had turned my moment of strength into a weapon to use against me. And then Ryan joined in. "Look, Em," he said during a call. "I get that you're proud of yourself, but Mom's really hurt. She said you humiliated her in front of everyone. Can't you just let it go?" Humiliated her? I replayed the dinner in my head. She told me I shouldn't have been born, and somehow I was the one who humiliated her. That was the story she was spreading, painting me as the ungrateful, selfish daughter who disrespected her saintly mother. It was infuriating. But it was also familiar. This was her pattern. She twisted reality, made herself the victim, and rallied the family to her side. And just like when I was a kid, they all fell in line. The difference was, this time, I wasn't a kid. One Sunday afternoon, I drove back to my parents' house. I hadn't planned to confront her, but the weight of it all was crushing me. I needed to see her face, to look her in the eye and ask why she had spent my entire life tearing me down. She was in the kitchen when I arrived, slicing apples as though nothing was wrong. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling, "why do you hate me so much?" Her knife paused mid-slice. She set it down slowly, then finally looked at me. And in her eyes, I didn't see confusion or regret. I saw something darker. "I don't hate you," she said coldly. "I just wish you had turned out different. You've always been difficult, Emily. Always needing to prove something. Always making me look bad. Sometimes I think God made a mistake." My chest tightened, but I forced myself to hold her gaze. "A mistake?" I whispered. She crossed her arms, her lips curling into that familiar smirk. "Yes, if it weren't for you, maybe this family would have been easier. Happier." Her words slammed into me like a tidal wave, but instead of drowning this time, I felt something else rise inside me. Clarity. For years, I had thought if I just worked harder, achieved more, tried longer, I could earn her love. But in that moment, I understood the truth. She was never going to give it. No promotion, no success, no amount of bending over backward would change her. And that realization didn't break me. It set me free. Because now, I knew exactly what I had to do. That night, after leaving my parents' house, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, numb. Her words echoed in my ears. A mistake, a burden, an unwanted child. I could have let them crush me again, like they had so many times before. But something was different now. I had a choice. keep chasing her approval like a mirage I'd never reach, or finally claim the life I had built for myself, without her permission. The next morning, I walked into my office with my head held high. My team congratulated me on the promotion again, and I realized, here, I was valued. Here, I was respected. I didn't have to beg for scraps of affection or battle invisible comparisons. These people saw me for who I was, not for who I failed to be in someone else's eyes. And that was when it hit me. My revenge wasn't about screaming back at my mother or trying to prove her wrong with one-liners. My revenge was living the life she swore I didn't deserve. My revenge was thriving, loudly and unapologetically, where she thought I would fail. But I wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, another family dinner rolled around. I almost didn't go, but a part of me wanted closure. Not the desperate kind where I hoped she'd suddenly say she loved me, but the kind where I would finally say my truth. When I walked in, the usual chatter quieted. Mom gave me her typical cool stare, but I noticed something else this time: wariness. Maybe she realized I wasn't the timid daughter she could control anymore. We sat down, plates filled, drinks poured. For most of the meal, I stayed silent, letting everyone chatter about Claire's perfect children and Ryan's new business idea. But when dessert came, I lifted my glass again, just like I had at the last dinner. "I want to make a toast," I said. The room quieted. My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. To family, the kind we're born into and the kind we choose for ourselves. I let that sink in, then turned my eyes directly on my mother. Because sometimes the family we're born into fails us. Sometimes a mother makes her own child feel unwanted. But what I've learned is this: I don't need her permission to exist. I don't need her approval to succeed. I am enough, exactly as I am. Gasps rippled around the table. My aunt's fork clattered against her plate. Claire muttered, "Oh my God." Dad rubbed his temples, as if the weight of my words was too heavy for him. But I didn't care. I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to myself. Mom's face darkened, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. "How dare you—" she started, but I cut her off. "No, Mom. How dare you," I said, my voice firmer now, strong enough to shake. "How dare you spend years tearing me down, telling me I was less when I was more than you ever saw? You don't get to decide my worth anymore. That power is gone." For the first time in my life, I watched her struggle for words. She opened her mouth, closed it again, her face flushed with a mix of rage and shock. I stood, setting my glass down with a soft but final clink. "Enjoy your evening," I said, calm and steady. "I'll enjoy my life." And with that, I walked away. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because she had changed, she hadn't, and maybe she never would, but because I finally had. My revenge wasn't a scream. It was a choice. To stop letting her define me. To live, fully and unapologetically, as the person she swore shouldn't have been born. And that was the sweetest victory of all. Walking away from that dinner wasn't easy. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight, but there was also a strange sense of release, like I had finally set down a weight I had been carrying since childhood. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my mother's cruelty. I was choosing my own path, on my own terms. As I drove home, the city lights blurred past my windows, and I thought about everything I had endured. The years of silence, the endless comparisons, the whispered comments at family gatherings that made me feel like an outsider in my own bloodline. For so long, I believed their version of me, the difficult one, the disappointment, the mistake. But the truth is, I was never the problem. I was the scapegoat for her frustrations, the punching bag for her unhappiness. And once I stopped carrying that shame, I realized something powerful. I had been enough all along. That $90,000 promotion wasn't just a career milestone. It was proof that I had carved a place for myself in this world, despite everything stacked against me. Every late night at the office, every tear I shed in silence, every time I bit my tongue instead of lashing back, it had all led me here, to strength, to independence, to freedom. And the best part? I didn't need her acknowledgement anymore. That used to be the hardest pill to swallow, that no matter what I did, my mother would never give me the validation I craved. But now, I see that for what it is, her limitation, not mine. I don't hate her. I don't even pity her. I simply don't let her define me anymore. And that shift, quiet, powerful, liberating, has changed everything. I think back to the girl I used to be, sitting in her room, crying quietly into her pillow, wondering why she wasn't enough. If I could talk to her now, I'd tell her, one day, you'll see. You're not the mistake. You're the miracle. And the very people who try to break you will never succeed, because your strength runs deeper than their cruelty. And if you're listening to my story right now, maybe you felt like me, unwanted, dismissed, underestimated by the very people who were supposed to love you the most. Maybe you've been told you'll never be enough. Let me be the voice that tells you the opposite. You are enough. You are worthy. And sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling or proving them wrong in the moment. The best revenge is simply living your life fully, happily, and without apology. I don't know if my family will ever change. I don't know if my mother will ever feel regret for the words she said, but I do know this. I'm no longer waiting for her to. I've taken back my power, and I refuse to give it away again. So here I am, raising my glass one last time. Not to my mother, not to the pain, but to myself. To resilience. To healing. To living a life I'm proud of, whether or not she approves. And to you, listening to my story. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been told you shouldn't have been born, know this. You don't need anyone's permission to shine. Thank you for listening to my journey. If this story touched you, if you've ever faced something similar, share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. Because sometimes, the stories we tell can help someone else find the strength to write their own ending.